Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the afternoon sessions. I'm Derek Strauss, and I have the pleasure of introducing to you Jonathan Bruce. Jonathan is the VP of Product Management at Elation. And Jonathan's going to be dealing with a fascinating subject that I'm sure all of us are really looking forward to seeing. You see it up there on the screen already. Data marketplaces, the real, the fake, and the ugly. I feel like there should be some music to this. But over to you, Jonathan. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hi, thank you, Derek, for the very kind introduction. So hello all, my name is Jonathan Bruce, VP of Product Management here at Elation, based in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I'm happy to report it's delightfully cool, unlike many of the parts of the world that are overheating this summer. So before we get started, a little about me. I have been a data guy my entire career, starting with Sun Microsystems a little over 20 years ago when I worked on some of the most synonymous investments in data access for developers, that being the JDBC API. I'm an author of the still in print book on JDBC, have a number of patents behind it. But really, the data beat has been something that's sustained me right throughout my career, both at Salesforce, Progress Software, Cloudflare, and now here at Elation, where we are day-to-day working with our customers, building enterprise catalogs to help them remove the silos on their data, help breathe new trust into it to allow them to take actions on their most important enterprise data. But today, we're going to talk about data marketplaces. It's a really interesting topic here, and we'll spend a few minutes together here to really kind of talk through really what is the right kind of journey we want to go on here. So the core problem that so many of the customers that I work with today is, how do I actually locate the right data set to achieve the goals that I've been given? In today's world, so many of the customers that I work with day to day and the people I work with are very much focused on achieving OKRs and core metrics, are much more metrics driven for the outcomes that they want to get to. Many of the questions that we face day to day is like, does my organization have actually the data set that I need to be successful? And if so, where on earth do I find it? And more importantly, not that is it any good, can I actually trust it? And what many people immediately come to is that they go, have this light bulb in his head, and then they go, well, maybe it's a marketplace. Maybe there's a marketplace out there for me to be able to get the data that I need for my job. But I think there's a lot of confusion. One of the things we're going to do today together is try to make some progress in disambiguating what the term data marketplace should actually mean. And I will say, over the course of my career, I have seen a number of entities try and fail at doing this. And I think where we are now, the enterprise world is ready for someone to do it right. And I think there are a couple of examples whereby we will really get a sense of where that actually is right now. There are a number of two-sided marketplaces out there today, and I'll call out a few of them here, including the Amazon Data Exchange, the Snowflake Data Marketplace, data.gov et al. But I think there's a really important moment where we can spend a little time to actually compare and contrast what they offer and how they actually work. But I think there's some really important lessons we can look at as to how companies and larger enterprise, particularly Salesforce, have created an environment, an ecosystem, an economy for value exchange, which ultimately is the primary function of a market. I think it's really also important to understand how one shops for data that you need for your job. So there's a real difference in terms of shopping for how one might shop in a typical kind of brick and mortar marketplace and how one does this for data. And we're going to kind of give you what we feel are some of the early tools and how to think about what might be the right path for your organization to engage in a marketplace. Okay, first things first, let's get some definitions out of the way. We want to make sure we could really make sure we can separate, disambiguate, say what you will, what is a data marketplace, and really try to look at unpacking the marketplace sort of definition itself. So literally a marketplace. It's really interesting to do this. I often do this with presentations. I go back to the core definitions here. And a marketplace can be defined as an open space where a market is formally held in intent. You often run into these places around the world, and I do a lot of travel where you kind of talk about a marketplace tent. And these are the functions and entities that allow people to gather for the function, the purchase of sales, of goods, livestock, and other commodities. And it's often known also as an area where commercial dealings can be conducted. So retail, flea market, whatever, bazaar. So I think that definition out of the way, let's look at a marketplace here. Now, this is an example of a marketplace actually in South Korea. Never been here by myself, but I think it's really interesting just to take a step back and look at what we are seeing here. What you are seeing in a marketplace is an evidence of multiple vendors that are not curated. They are here in the context to offer their wares. And they engage with consumers, and the consumers are there to actually acquire and buy these these wares because they don't necessarily have these things at home. And this is the rawest example of a marketplace out there, and I think that's familiar to many of us today. But let's kind of layer on something here. Let's picture a marketplace whereby there's some additional curation of the contents within that marketplace. There's additional trust, there's additional packaging, there's additional ways of customers to understand what the actual value is in their customers. And this very much kind of aligns around packaging down the line. In a marketplace in today's world, there's much more curation because it's much more of a collection of a supply chain. This is the ending point of a supply chain whereby customers can acquire goods. Once again, they have a reason to acquire those goods because they want to bring them home for their own use. And then, of course, how I live is how, this marketplace now is in my home. It's in my phone, it's on my laptop. When I fly around the world and I need groceries to be home, I do this on my laptop before I get home, and this is all ready for me at home. So the marketplace is, very much a day-to-day part of our lives in terms of it's a context whereby multiple suppliers have a presentation context where me as a consumer can consume these goods. Okay, now let's imagine what that might mean for data. As a data guy, there's been many times in my life when I've wanted to have a set of data to go answer a really difficult question, either for myself, for my team, or my executives that I'm working for day to day. In a marketplace for data, this is once again a notional place where multiple providers, rather than wares and actual tactile goods, are providing a set of curated data sets that are available, ready for consumption, not so much by consumers, but more by enterprises. And there's a context and a set of contracts whereby these data sets can be acquired such that they can ameliorate the context that they have. A couple of examples here, you see the Amazon marketplace and the Snowflake marketplace down the line. Now, the trick here is that there is a much different contract here at play. The contract here is much more based on a trust, the fact that the consumers are able to engage with these marketplaces with a concrete sense that there is inherent trust that the data they're acquiring is something they could use for their critical applications. I'll take a step back here and I'll think about my experiences here at Salesforce. One of the things Salesforce did really, really well is they positioned the value add of App Exchange such that they created an environment, an ecosystem, if you will, for producers and consumers to engage. Now, the exchange of wares was slightly different, not so much data, but the value in what was exchanged is really important to think about here. App Exchange was conceived as a means by which Salesforce partners could deliver add-on value directly to the Salesforce ecosystem. But they did it in a way such that Salesforce took a step back and realized that there was a sense of, scale that they could deliver to their broader ecosystem by allowing for this openness here. But underlying all of this was a huge amount of trust, quality control, and ultimately it was about building in an incentive for these producers to engage with the Salesforce ecosystem. And then the responsibility of Salesforce was to provide an environment whereby that value became very, very apparent within the applications that we're using today. In the Salesforce example, that would have been Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, or whatever else. Now, as we think about the notion of our marketplace, particularly in the data marketplace, there are some key lessons that I think we can draw from these experiences. So let's get into it. Now, I think it's also important to remember that, all these pictures may look quite comical here. Some of the aspects of a marketplace don't necessarily translate well. So if I'm an individual like a data analyst or a business user or a data scientist, and I wish to get a set of data with from our marketplace, the notion of a shopping cart doesn't really apply if I'm operating in my own kitchen, so to speak. My own kitchen is the ability for me to absorb the data sets that I need. So what might be the kind of key things I need to think about as I look to kind of bring this to life? In an enterprise environment, we don't all have a set of egalitarian rights, particularly if I'm operating in a regulated environment. It's very important that a data marketplace is aware of who should be either requesting and then most importantly, actually using some of the data as well. In an enterprise, not everyone in that household has the same permissions. And having these controls and insights as to who's actually consuming the data is extraordinarily important. Why? Because ultimately that is part of the overall risk mitigation that many of the enterprises want to be able to manage more concretely as they open up their enterprises to a data marketplace. I think it's also important here to remember that in the enterprise context, the regulatory environments actually gets very, very tricky, whereby there's not really a try before you buy experience here. It's not like you can go down the aisle, say, oh, I'd like to try this bespoke French farm-to-table cheese. The actual ability to actually request access for this can, in fact, trigger a set of workflows that could be very difficult to manage. So it's important to remember that's not necessarily a right that you would typically have. So let's look at some of the things here. We've looked at a marketplace in a context we all understand. That is shopping for groceries, for food, or whatever in the stores. You have the notion of being able to walk up and down the aisles, to browse, and then to search. You have the ability to compare your options. If you're looking at 2 kinds of cereal, 2 kinds of olive oil, 2 kinds of wine, the packaging is your means by which you can judge whether this is the right product for you. And there's a huge amount of science that goes into that. The decision for you to purchase often is a function of the ingredients of what you find. Then you use the function of those to actually do something with it. In this case, it could be to make a dish. When you're shopping for data sets in your organization, there's lots of comparisons that you see here. You want to be able to browse, you want to be able to search, but the manner in which you actually compare and contrast, you're less looking at the packaging, you're looking at the metadata. How actually are these data sets described? The decision that you make as to what data set that you use is a function of your understanding of the data sets, and then a request to actually use that data is often required. And then ultimately you can make a decision yourself that you actually want to use that as part of your product, your data product, or your workflow that you're looking to bring to life. So really interesting comparison here. The core of the metaphor here is the understanding, the comparison, the evaluation is I can either taste, taste, or feel this. I have to compare my options as a function of looking at the metadata here. I've got a couple of really interesting examples here. So yes, olive oil may look different, but it actually tastes different. This here is a really interesting example whereby ultimately the motivation and the environment we're trying to create is to allow for an environment of much greater self-serve. So in a sense here, we, if we are IT, want to get out of the way of the business. We want to prevent and then present an environment such that that journey to the marketplace, the acquisition of the data set can be something that the business user can do without IT having to provision and serve. And the manner in which you do that is all about bringing to life some of these qualities that you see in typical packaging and bringing that to life in the data set. So a couple of examples here. If you look at the eggs on the left and the Cheerios on the right, there's a couple of really interesting things that pop out here. Look at the eggs on the left-hand side. These are noted as ethically grown and pasture raised. Why is that important to me as a father who has 2 kids? I want to make sure I'm feeding my kids quality food. So I'm going to be looking for these quality labels and these actual endorsements that these are actually something that's going to be interesting for, going to be appropriate for my kids to eat. Notice also that on the Cheerios thing, they have a call out for gluten-free, no artificial flavoring, but also a breakdown for the nutritional components that's in that. It's really important also that I understand where this stuff comes from. Sourcing in the data context, that's about lineage. What is the provenance of that data? Where did it come from such that I can unpack that provenance of that data, the lineage, to fully understand whether that is something that is appropriate for me to join as well. And then the serving suggestions, the corollary there, is from the data set. So how best could that data be combined with other data to produce a potential outcome that would be very satisfactory for you? The example there, of course, is if I combine Cheerios with whole fat milk, I'm likely to have a better experience than I to combine Cheerios with low fat milk. That maybe just a personal preference that's coming across here. So it's really interesting here when I look at this example, look at the packaging that I have here, and look at the kind of quality endorsements and the sourcing endorsements and the potential serving suggestions here. There are direct mappings to what are the kind of things, the kind of behaviors that I should have when I'm thinking about a data marketplace, and we want to create an environment such that it's more self-served. So,
Jonathan, just a quick time check. We're roughly halfway through.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll finish on time here. Let's keep going here. This here, the cookie jar, the kids looking for the cookie jar here in terms of the other piece to look at here is that the reason to potentially package a set of data within a marketplace shouldn't always be a function of popularity. It's about the usefulness and the potential application of that data in a marketplace here. The actual means by which and the reason by which a set of data might be consumed in the marketplace is going to be really driven as a function of the ability for an entity to understand the degree of stewardship, the degree of curation, to make sure that the data that I'm receiving, the data that I'm consuming, is actually something that is ready to be consumed, ready to be baked into how my organization functions around a third set of data. So popularity, not the only reason as we go through this. Okay, so now let's think about how we think about shopping for data. Well, not necessarily buying the data. So I think it's really important that in a kind of pantry type scenario where you're at home, you have your goods out here, you're going to look to buy and compare and to look at what are the different kind of permutations and options here by looking at the packaging to understand what might be the case. A set of sampling and taste testing will be something that you would want to be able to do as well. The same applies to the data market here. With a set of metadata here, it's really important also you have the ability to get a flavor, if you will, such that you can sample, run test queries, that then ultimately you can understand what might and how may that ultimately serve your needs. So that ability, not only to do it for yourself, but understand how the broader community have actually used this are going to be really important. Okay, so I think key here, picking ingredients from your marketplace here, even if you have full access to the data, you need to know the actual sense of the data to make sure that you want to feed it into the business outcome that you're after here. But even if you have full access to it, you want to make sure that there's a specific trust around it, because increasingly what people are doing is feeding these data sets in combination with your own enterprise data sets as a function of the generative or AI and AI kind of capabilities that you are trying to build here. So understanding that capability is really, really critical, because increasingly people are looking to do this to build greater efficiencies to help with those margins down the line. I think it's important to remember here that catalogs are indeed another way to shop. Now, I come from the catalog background here. This is what Alation does day to day here. The importance of what a catalog can offer here is a degree of kind of curation and a set of trust across a disparate set of data sources as well. And the real kind of coming together of what these third-party marketplaces can do as a way to enrich and to ameliorate what an enterprise catalog could look like as well. You could see in this case, a catalog could be represented by a set of old rocking chairs, but ultimately this is a curated set of lists. There's an associated brand that you have here because there's a degree of trust that's been built in here as well. Same applies in the online sense as well. So if you have a set of catalogs out there, you basically get to a point whereby you have this abstracted layer. An abstracted layer that is the right blend of governance, right sense of trust, the right sense of usability and discoverability of that data, such that it's wired in a way that is fully actionable and achievable for your data analysts, business users, et cetera, et cetera. It's also important to remember that it's about incenting the right sense of data culture, and a data culture that is actually leveraged around a federated model, often whereby large entities are operating across multiple business units, and they wanted to make sure that these individual business units have the ability to operate with a degree of autonomy. And in a federated model here, you want to make sure also that that catalog is fully available to the entire organization here, but you also need to have the set of controls down the line, but you also need to have the ability to pay and potentially also have attribution as these various different data units operate here. So ultimately, you want a place where different peoples and teams in an organization can both buy or sell data sets, or even exchange these data sets with a sense of attribution so the broader corporate goals can be met here. Now, I talked about a federated governance experience, and this is a really important concept to get across here. As customers take a step back, think about the catalog notion of being able to engage at this abstract layer where your traditional RDBMS, BI, flat file data sources, and third-party marketplaces can be wired in together with a single experiences here. To achieve these critical business outcomes, data X users, and by that I mean data analyst users, business analytic users, need to be able to have an experience that is relevant to the context to which they're operating. It's very easy to conceive a logical catalog that wires everything together, but the downstream effect of doing so and not being conscious of the actual needs of the individual or where they're operating with an organization can be very detrimental to the success you're trying to achieve here. This is why a federated governance experience is so important. And if you overlay a marketplace around that, it's making sure that you have the right sense of experiences that are available for the users when they log into a catalog, but also have the ability to jump across these domains through different data sets under the auspices of other federated governance experiences, such that as the administrator of this, you can be conscious for the experiences you want to bring to life, but as the end user, the data analysts, the business users, you also have the controls by which you can go outside your typical world and be able to navigate these data sets in a way that is agreeable. Okay, so I think as we kind of look to kind of package our talk track here, I think it's really important here as we look about, translating some of the other operating terms in a way that, from the merchandising world to the data world, the notion of selling, more precise term of that is actually merchandising. What that really means in the data world, it's about data stewardship. You cannot achieve data stewardship in a way that is agreeable unless you are able to build a sense of trust in that data as well. So that's all about the level of governance. But I also always think about governance as a level of equilibrium. I do not believe anybody wakes up every day and says, today in my enterprise, I need more governance. No one actually thinks that. It's about achieving the right balance of governance such that, you can actually trigger a buying traction whereby that data can be searched and discovered in a way that is, enabling for the end business user. Almost done here.
Okay.
So if I think about lastly here, the last couple of slides here, we had the notion of, key options here across data. Amazon Data Exchange, ADX, Snowflake Data Plus, or indeed Data Raid. I think the real kind of delta here is that with Amazon, as you would expect, you have a huge spread of variety here, but there are ultimately some real kind of keep your procurement challenges, especially for particular verticals that we need to keep in place. Snowflake gives you a really great experience in terms of being able to sample, but it's very Snowflakey. And Data Raid here, I think, has the really interesting balance of kind of having that richness of metadata, but that diversity in vendor relationships out of that. I thought it would be interesting, however, as I land at this presentation here to kind of bring it to life of how might this look like here in our product here. We have a direct and integrated in-context marketplace within our catalog here. And within that catalog, I can add and ameliorate my data by searching for whatever I would like here. And that comes to life with a set of integrated marketplaces that allow me to immediately include this in my data discovery processes here. There's a quick example here. You can play with this today on Alation marketplaces down the line. But very quickly here, I search for cloud. I narrow my search for the Amazon Data Exchange. But what I can see here, I can see an egalitarian experience. An egalitarian experience where producers have the ability to package, but also differentiate their products. And as we learned today, differentiation of that product allows consumers to make the choice they want to have. But consumers also have the ability to consume in a manner that meets their needs. And by that, I mean, what is ultimately the manner in which I want to have this within my environment? In this case, we offer you the choice of having additional data tables. Perhaps you want to have it in a CSV format for further post-processing, but ultimately it's about having this much more consumable in a way that it's immediately actionable in their workflows. So I'll hit pause there, Derek. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk. I see we have a couple of questions coming in. I would be delighted to tackle some of those now.
Okay, super. Thanks very much. And also thanks for the questions. A number of them have started coming through. Let's see, let's start off with, can you provide some examples or best practices for effectively describing and achieving the goals of shopping for data or selling data sets within an organization?
Right, so that's actually probably 3 questions in one, I think. So let's start with how best to describe that data. So I think one of the most important facets that I see has been very important for some of our customers is to make sure that the actual lineage of that data is available in a way that is appealing to a couple of key audiences. Now, if I think about the consumer of that data, that consumer could be, span the spectrum of the business users on the left to more the data scientists in the middle to the data analysts on the right. Each of those audience will want to be able to look at different facets of that lineage, from more the technical lineage to more the business lineage. So the manner in which that is described on the marketplace, ultimately, I feel is the most important kind of ingredient, if you will, to make sure that that data set is not only useful, but the real success of that data set is how often and is it consumed by the right people at the right time. So it's that balance of being able to present that level of insight, which ultimately gives that consumer the confidence that, in fact, this is a trusted data set that they can use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that trust side of it is so key, isn't it? And then another one, how do data marketplaces like Snowflake, Data Marketplace, AWS, etc., compare just in terms of the range and the quality of available data sets?
Difficult to answer in a simple question, but I think the simple takeaway from my observation in the studies that we've done here at Elation is that Amazon offers a huge range of diversity. And with diversity, you also get a variable in range of quality, okay? My experiences with Snowflake is that, the range is much less, but the quality is much deeper. I think those are the 2 good direct comparisons that I would see down the line. Now, of course, that's, I think, consistent with the culture of both of those entities. You go to Amazon as a consumer, I have it on my phone here, there's a massive range of products that I can get. Some of the products, well, not of the quality that I would prefer. It's about more of the volume. And with volume, I think there's a reduction in quality. So yes, I think it's good to have variances in this depending on your use case. But that will be my position there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Third question here, how do marketplaces support Gen AI?
Okay. I think I have a little scorecard on my desk here when I actually score how often I get asked this question. Generative AI is a hugely popular topic across many, many, many different contexts right now. And I think the key thing for generative AI is people see some of the amazing things you could do with very little input with the likes of ChatGPT. People's imagination runs quickly. I think there's application of these kind of capabilities to ultimately make some experiences much, much easier. So let's talk about the data producers for a second. One of the most important things that they need to do is be able to govern and curate these data sets. And often how they do it is they do it with a catalog. And ultimately, one of the outputs of a catalog is making these data sets much, much more consumable to a broader audience. And that could be done within the context of a large multifaceted entity or across entities down the line. So it's about making sure that the governance experience can be much easier, because governing is typically very human involved. One of the things generative AI can do really, really well is auto-generate titles and descriptions, all the policies, and to help make these catalogs that ultimately support these marketplaces much more consumable, and to really reduce the level of human effort it takes to get them to a correct, appropriately curated state, right? I think from the generative AI perspective also is that there is a huge amount of excitement out there in terms of how we can democratize that data access. So the ability to use natural language, semantic search, to move away from the classic SQL search that I've used all my career to an ability to actually able to, such to the point where my mother-in-law is even asking me about semantic search, tells me that there's a real kind of threshold we cross, in that people are now quickly having the assumption that this is going to be the ability that they would have to be able to consume this data. So I think it's very contributory in both the generation of these data sets, but the consumption of these data sets. And I'll finish in one piece here, in that the other important aspect of it is that many entities are using marketplaces and third-party data in order to inform these models. What's a really important part of this is that these models themselves need to also become trusted facets and trusted assets, right? So whether it's the notebooks you use to develop these AI models, or the actual models themselves in their runtime state, being able to curate and to have the arm of governance across these as well will be a really important part of the outcomes that we see here.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's a great answer, and some good things for us to think about as we step more and more into this world of generative AI. Excuse me. So all this talk of marketplaces and foods and those pictures that you showed has made me really hungry. And I'm sure the rest of our audience is probably getting to the end of their day as well and starting to think about what they're going to eat for dinner. But beyond that, thanks for sharing some great insights with us, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. And now we know more about the real, the fake, and the ugly. So thanks again. And I hope you can enjoy the rest of the conference together with everyone else.
A real pleasure. Thank you so much, Derek.